There's nothing that cuts deeper than losing the person who taught you how to be strong. When everything you love is taken away, vengeance becomes the only thing that makes sense. Kara Stormblade lived for one purpose after her father's death, to find his killer and make him pay. She tracked the warrior Thane of Skeld through dangerous lands, ready to fight him to the death. But when their swords finally met, something unexpected happened. The truth came out, and it changed everything she thought she knew. Sometimes the person you think is your enemy turns out to be someone completely different. What happens when a daughter's quest for revenge leads her to discover that the man she wants to kill might be the only one who truly honored her father? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the fjord, like the grief that had settled over Kara Stormblade's heart these past 3 moons. She stood at the edge of her father's burial mound, the ancient stones arranged in the shape of a longship that would carry Bjorn the Bold to Valhalla. The weathered sword in her hands, his sword, felt heavier than it had when he first placed it in her small fingers all those years ago. A blade is only as strong as the hand that wields it, he had told her then, his calloused palm covering hers as they gripped the leather-wrapped hilt together. But more important than strength is the heart that guides the hand. Never draw steel in anger alone, little wolf. Let wisdom temper your rage. Now wisdom felt like a luxury she could not afford. Anger was all she had left. The village of Raven's Hollow stretched below her, its timber halls and stone foundations built into the natural curve of the coastline. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and she could hear the distant sounds of daily life, children playing between the houses, the rhythmic hammering from the blacksmith's forge, the low voices of the fishermen mending their nets. It was a peaceful scene that felt wrong somehow, as if the world should have stopped turning when her father drew his last breath. Astrid the Wise emerged from the morning shadows, her grey hair braided with silver rings that marked her status as a Völva, a seer and keeper of ancient knowledge. The old woman's eyes, still sharp despite her 70 winters, studied Kara with concern. "You stand here every dawn," Astrid said, her voice carrying the authority of one who had counseled 3 generations of warriors. "The dead cannot hear your promises, child. Only the living can keep them." Kara's fingers tightened on the sword's grip. "Then hear me now, wise one. I swear by Thor's hammer and by the blood in my veins, I will find the dog who murdered my father. Thane of Skeld will pay for what he did." Astrid's weathered face creased with worry. "You speak of Thane as if you know him. You were not there that night, Kara. You did not see what happened in the forest beyond the border stones." "I know what the survivors told us," Kara replied, her voice hard as iron. "I know that my father rode out with 12 good men to defend our lands from raiders. I know that only 3 returned, wounded and broken. Speaking of a giant with silver on his arms, who cut down warriors like wheat before the scythe. I know that Thane of Skeld has terrorized the northern clans for years. And that night, he added my father's name to his bloody tally." The seer was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun climb higher over the water. "Knowledge and truth are not always the same thing, little wolf. Your father taught you that." Kara turned away from the burial mound, her jaw set with determination. "My father also taught me that honor must be answered with honor and blood with blood. If you will not support my quest for justice, then at least do not stand in my way." She strode down the hillside toward the village, her father's sword secured across her back. The familiar weight of it was both comfort and burden, a reminder of everything she had lost and everything she meant to reclaim. Eric Ironhand was sharpening axes outside his smithy when she approached. The burly man had been her father's closest friend since boyhood, and the grief in his eyes when he saw her was almost too much to bear. His massive arms, scarred from decades of working hot metal, paused in their rhythmic motion. "You have that look," he said without preamble. "The same look your father had before he rode to battle." "Where are you planning to go, Kara?" "North," she said simply. "To find Thane of Skeld." Eric set down his whetstone and studied her face. "That's a fool's errand, and you know it. Thane is not some common raider you can track down and challenge to single combat. He commands respect among the northern clans, and his warriors number in the hundreds. Then I'll find a way to draw him out alone, Kara said. A challenge to his honor, perhaps, or I'll wait for the right moment when he's separated from his men. And then what? Eric demanded, his voice rising. Even if you somehow manage to face him blade to blade, he's been killing warriors since before you were born. He's survived more battles than most men see in a lifetime. What makes you think you can succeed where grown men have failed? Kara drew her father's sword, the steel singing as it cleared the scabbard. The blade was perfectly balanced, its edges sharp enough to split a hair. Along the fuller, ancient runes spelled out words of power and protection. Because I carry more than just steel. I carry the weight of justice and the love of a daughter for her father. That counts for something. Eric shook his head, but she could see the resignation in his eyes. He had known her since she was old enough to walk, had watched her train with wooden swords and graduate to steel. He understood that once her mind was made up, nothing would change it. If you're determined to do this, he said heavily, then at least let me help you prepare. Your father's armor is still in the longhouse, and you'll need provisions for the journey. The northern passes are treacherous this time of year. They spent the remainder of the morning gathering what she would need. Her father's mail shirt fit her well enough with some adjustment, the iron rings polished to a dull gleam that would not catch the light and give away her position. She packed dried meat, hard bread, and a water skin, along with a small pot for cooking and a warm cloak lined with wolf fur. Young Olaf, barely 16 and still bearing the eager expression of one who had never seen real violence, found her as she prepared her horse. He had been sweet on her for years, though she had never encouraged his attention. His face was flushed with determination and something that might have been desperation. "Let me come with you," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Two blades are better than one, and I know the northern trails." "No," Kara said firmly, checking her horse's bridle. "This is my burden to bear." "Your father was kind to me when no one else would be," Olaf insisted. "He gave me work when my own family cast me out. I owe him a debt of honor." Kara turned to face him, seeing the earnestness in his pale blue eyes. "You owe him nothing, Olaf, and I won't have your death on my conscience as well. This quest is mine alone." As the sun reached its zenith, she made her final preparations. The silver arm ring that had belonged to her mother, the only thing she had left of the woman who died bringing her into the world, went into a small leather pouch around her neck. It was not much to remember her by, but it was precious nonetheless. Astrid appeared one final time as Kara mounted her horse, a sturdy mare named Sif, with a coat the color of autumn leaves. "If you will not listen to wisdom," the seer said, "then at least listen to this warning. The path you walk is darker than you know. When you find what you seek, you may discover it is not what you expected to find. Speak plainly, wise one," Kara said, settling into her saddle. "What do you see?" Astrid's eyes seemed to look past her, into some distant vision only she could perceive. "I see blood on snow, and truth where lies once lived. I see a choice that will define not just your fate, but the fate of many. Be careful which path you choose when the moment comes." With those cryptic words hanging in the air, Kara spurred her horse forward. The village fell behind her as she rode toward the northern passes, her father's sword across her back and vengeance burning in her heart. She did not look back, could not afford to, lest her resolve weaken. The road ahead was long and dangerous, winding through territories controlled by rival clans and wild men who recognized no law but strength. But she had been trained by the finest warrior in all the northern lands, and she carried his blade and his blood. That would have to be enough. Behind her, the people of Raven's Hollow watched their fiercest daughter ride toward what many believed would be her doom. They did not know, could not have known, that she rode not just toward vengeance, but toward a truth that would change everything she believed about honor, justice, and the thin line between love and hate. The first crack in Kara's certainty came 3 days into her journey. In a place she had never expected to find it, she had stopped at Grimhold, a trading post built into the side of a steep cliff where merchants and travelers gathered to rest and resupply. The wooden structure clung to the rock face like a barnacle, its multiple levels connected by narrow stairs and rope bridges. It was the last outpost before the truly wild country began, and Kara knew it might be her final chance to gather information about Thane's movements. The common room reeked of ale, unwashed bodies, and wood smoke. Rough men huddled around crude tables, speaking in low voices about raids, weather, and the movement of various war bands through the mountains. Kara kept her hood up and her voice quiet, as she nursed a cup of mead and listened to the conversations. Around her, it was there that she overheard two traders discussing a recent encounter with Thane's band. Saw them not 5 days past, one was saying. A scarred man with only 3 fingers on his left hand. Camped in the valley below Ravenscrag. Must have been 40 warriors at least. Dangerous men, his companion agreed, stroking his grey beard. Though I'll say this for Thane, he pays fair coin for good information and doesn't trouble honest merchants. Not like some of these border raiders who'd cut your throat for a handful of silver. Kara's grip tightened on her cup. These men spoke of her father's killer as if he were merely another clan leader, not the savage butcher she had been led to believe. You sound as if you admire him, she said, keeping her voice level. The traders turned to look at her, taking in her youth and the quality of her weapons. The 3-fingered man shrugged. I don't admire any warrior girl, but I respect those who keep their word and pay their debts. Thane's never broken an oath to me, even if he's a killer. Kara pressed. The bearded trader laughed, but there was no humor in it. We're all killers here, one way or another. The question is whether you kill for gold, for glory, or for something greater. Word is, Thane only fights when honor demands it. Kara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Honor? What honor is there in raiding peaceful villages? The 2 men exchanged a look. What village are you speaking of, girl? The 3-fingered trader asked. Thane hasn't raided anyone in over a year. He's been too busy dealing with the real threats. The Blood Eagle savages from the eastern wastes, and that mad dog Hrothgar, who's been burning settlements all along the coast. The words hit Kara like a physical blow. She rose abruptly, coins clattering on the table as she dropped payment for her drink. She needed air, needed space to think. Outside, the wind cut through her cloak as she leaned against the wooden railing that was all that stood between her and a 100-foot drop. The traders had to be wrong. They had to be lying or mistaken or troubled thoughts, young one. The voice came from the shadows beside the building. Kara spun, her hand going instinctively to her sword hilt, but relaxed when she saw it was just an old man wrapped in a tattered cloak. He was ancient, with white hair hanging in thin braids and skin like weathered leather. One of his eyes was milky with blindness, but the other was sharp as a blade. "Who are you?" she asked. "A dying man with a heavy burden," he replied, coughing wetly. "And you are Bjorn the Bold's daughter. I can see him in your face, in the way you stand." Kara's breath caught. "You knew my father?" The old man nodded slowly. "Knew him, fought beside him, called him friend for 30 years. My name is Magnus One-Eye, though few remember me now." He coughed again, and Kara saw flecks of blood on his lips. "I was there the night he died." The world seemed to tilt around her. Magnus had been one of the 3 survivors, but he had been so badly wounded that she had never been able to speak with him. The healers said he would not live through the winter, and she had assumed he was too addled by pain and fever to give reliable testimony. "Tell me what happened," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Magnus looked out over the precipice, his good eye distant with memory. "We rode out to investigate reports of raiders in the borderlands. Your father was worried. There had been signs of a large band moving through the area, and he feared they might threaten the village. We tracked them for 2 days before we found their camp." He paused, struggling for breath. "But when we got close enough to see them clearly, we realized they weren't raiders at all. They were survivors, women, children, old men, fleeing from something terrible. Their village had been burned, their warriors slaughtered. They were starving, desperate. What does this have to do with Thane?" Kara asked, though part of her already feared the answer. "Everything," Magnus wheezed. Because Thane was there too, but not as their enemy. He and his men had found the survivors first, were sharing their food and offering protection. When we approached under a peace banner, he welcomed us as fellow warriors, concerned for the innocent. The old man's words were like hammer blows to Kara's chest. That can't be true. The other survivors were half mad with pain and grief, Magnus interrupted. They saw what they expected to see, remembered what they needed to remember to make sense of the horror. But I was there, girl. I saw it all. He reached into his cloak with trembling fingers and pulled out a piece of fabric, dark blue wool stained with old blood. This came from the cloak of the man who killed your father. I tore it from him as he fled. Kara took the fabric with numb fingers. It was fine wool, expensive, but the color was wrong. Thane's men were known for wearing red and gold, the colors of their clan. This was deep blue, almost black. If not Thane, then who? She whispered. Magnus's eye burned with old anger. Hrothgar, the Oathbreaker, and his blood-mad warriors. They followed us there, attacked both camps without warning. In the darkness and confusion, men died on all sides. Your father and Thane fought back to back against Hrothgar's savages, protecting the refugees until the last. The fabric felt heavy in her hands, weighted with implications she wasn't ready to face. My father died fighting beside Thane? Aye, Magnus said sadly. And when the battle was over, when Hrothgar's men had been driven off, it was Thane who closed your father's eyes and spoke the words that would guide him to Valhalla. He gathered the dead with honor and built the cairns with his own hands. Kara's legs felt weak. She slumped against the railing, her world reshaping itself around this new truth. Why didn't you tell anyone this before now? Who would believe a dying old man over the testimony of younger, stronger voices? Magnus asked. And what difference would it make? Your father was still dead, and Hrothgar had vanished back into the eastern wastes, where no pursuit could follow. The truth seemed like a luxury we could not afford. He coughed again, more violently this time. But you're different. You have the fire in you to seek justice, not just revenge. I couldn't let you throw your life away fighting the wrong enemy. The implications crashed over her like a winter storm. For 3 months, she had been preparing to hunt down and kill a man who had, by all accounts, honored her father in his final moments. Meanwhile, the real murderer, Hrothgar, remained free to kill again. Where is he now? She asked, her voice hard. Where is Hrothgar? Magnus shook his head weakly. No one knows. He strikes like a wild animal, then disappears. Some say he has a fortress hidden in the frozen mountains. Others believe he's made pacts with dark spirits that hide him from mortal eyes. A new kind of fire began to burn in Kara's chest, not the hot rage of grief, but the cold determination of true purpose. Then I'll find him, however long it takes. The old warrior studied her face in the fading light. That's a harder path than the one you were walking. Thane is a known quantity, a warrior who fights with honor. Hrothgar is something else entirely, a beast wearing human shape. You'd be walking into darkness with no guarantee of finding your way out again. My father deserves justice, Kara said firmly. Real justice, not the hollow vengeance I was prepared to take. Magnus nodded slowly, a sad smile creasing his weathered features. Bjorn would be proud to hear those words. You truly are his daughter. He coughed once more, then straightened with visible effort. If you're truly set on this path, then you'll need allies. And there's only one man I know with the skill and knowledge to help you track Hrothgar through his own territory. Who? Kara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Thane of Skeld, Magnus said. The man you came here to kill. The ancient runestone stood like a weathered sentinel at the crossroads, its carved symbols speaking of boundaries crossed and oaths sworn in times long forgotten. Kara dismounted her horse and approached it carefully, running her fingers over the deep grooves that generations of wind and rain had not been able to erase. She could read the old script. Her father had insisted she learn it, saying that a warrior who could not understand the wisdom of the ancestors was doomed to repeat their mistakes. The stone spoke of 2 paths, one leading to the Hall of Skeld, where honor lived but danger waited, and another winding toward the cursed lands where Hrothgar was said to roam. 3 days had passed since her conversation with Magnus One-Eye, and the old warrior's revelations still churned in her mind like storm-tossed seas. Everything she thought she knew had been turned upside down, leaving her adrift in a world where enemies might be allies, and allies might be the very people she had sworn to destroy. The sound of approaching horses made her turn, hand instinctively moving to her sword. From the northern trail came a small group of travelers, 2 men and a woman, all well-armed but flying no clan banners. They rode with the easy confidence of those accustomed to dangerous roads. The leader was a man of perhaps 40 winters, his brown beard streaked with silver and a long scar running from his left temple to his jaw. He raised his hand in the universal gesture of peaceful greeting as his party drew closer. "Well met, young warrior," he called out. "I am Gunnar the Far-Travelled, and these are my companions Hilda Ironwill and Bjorn Axebreaker." He gestured to the woman and the younger man beside him. "We're bound for the trading post at Grimhold. The roads have been restless of late. Perhaps we might travel together for safety." Kara studied their faces, looking for signs of deception or hidden threat. But she saw only the honest fatigue of travelers who had been long on the road and the cautious friendliness of those who knew the value of allies in dangerous country. "I am Kara," she said simply. "I travel alone." Hilda, a stern-faced woman with greying hair bound in warrior braids, spoke up. "Alone is a dangerous way to travel these days, especially for one so young. Have you heard the news from the eastern settlements?" "What news?" Kara asked, though she suspected she knew what was coming. 3 villages burned in the last month," Bjorn Axebreaker said, his youthful face grim. "The survivors speak of a mad giant with eyes like winter storms, who kills for the joy of it. They call him Hrothgar the Oathbreaker." The name sent a chill through Kara's bones. "You've seen him?" "Not directly," Gunnar replied. "But we passed through Stonehaven 2 days after he struck there. The things we saw," he shook his head. "It wasn't war, it was butchery. Women and children cut down as they fled, elders tortured for sport. Whatever Hrothgar has become, he's no longer entirely human." Kara felt the familiar fire of anger kindle in her chest. But now it was directed at the right target. "Which direction did he go?" The 3 travelers exchanged glances. "Why do you ask?" Hilda said carefully. "Because he killed my father," Kara replied. "And I mean to make him answer for it." Gunnar's scarred face softened with understanding. "Ah, I see. The hunger for vengeance burns bright in your eyes, girl. But hunting Hrothgar is not like tracking an ordinary outlaw. He's clever as well as savage, and he has allies, men who've been twisted by the same darkness that claimed him. Then how can he be stopped?" Kara asked. "He can't, not by any single warrior," Hilda said bluntly. "It would take an army, or perhaps a small band of the most skilled fighters in all the northern lands, working together with perfect coordination. Or," Bjorn added thoughtfully, "someone who knows his methods, his hiding places, his weaknesses. Someone who's fought him before and lived to tell of it." Kara's pulse quickened. "Do you know of such a person?" Gunnar nodded slowly. "Thane of Skeld. He's tangled with Hrothgar 3 times that I know of, and each time he's managed to drive the madman back into the wastes. They say Thane knows Hrothgar's mind better than any living man." The irony was almost too much to bear. The man she had set out to kill was apparently the only one who could help her find her father's true murderer. "Where might I find Thane?" "His warband camps in the Thornwood Valley, about 2 days hard riding to the northeast," Hilda said. "But be careful, girl. Thane is not known for his patience with strangers who seek him out. He's been betrayed too many times to trust easily." They shared a simple meal by the runestone, dried meat and hard bread washed down with watered ale from Gunnar's wineskin. As they ate, the travelers shared more stories of their journeys, painting a picture of a land in turmoil. Hrothgar's raids had thrown the delicate balance between clans into chaos, with each group suspecting the others of harboring the madman or profiting from his attacks. "The High King grows old," Gunnar said, gazing toward the distant mountains. "His grip on the kingdom weakens each year, and ambitious men begin to circle like wolves around a wounded elk." In times like these, men like Hrothgar flourish. Chaos is their natural element. But men like Thane are needed too, Hilda added. Warriors who remember what honor means, who fight to protect rather than to plunder. The borderlands would have fallen to complete anarchy by now, if not for leaders like him. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the travelers prepared to continue their journey to Grimhold. Gunnar approached Kara one final time, his expressions serious. "A word of advice, if you'll hear it," he said. "When you meet Thane, and I believe you will, remember that he's a man who's lost much. His wife and children died in one of Hrothgar's earliest raids 5 years ago. The pain of that loss drives him still, and it's made him hard in some ways, though not cruel. Approach him with respect and be honest about your purpose. He values truth above almost all else." Kara nodded, filing the information away. "Thank you. Your counsel is welcome." As the 3 riders disappeared down the southern trail, Kara mounted her own horse and turned toward the northeast. The Thornwood Valley lay 2 days ahead, and with it the most dangerous conversation of her life. She would have to look into the eyes of the man she had planned to murder and ask for his help in hunting the real killer of her father. The path ahead wound through increasingly wild country. Ancient pines towered overhead, their branches so thick they blocked out much of the sky. She could hear the calls of ravens echoing through the forest. And more than once she caught glimpses of wolves shadowing her passage from a respectful distance. This was old land, where the barriers between the world of men and the realm of spirits grew thin. Her father had told her stories of these woods, tales of elves and trolls, of ancient battles fought between gods and giants. Looking up at the towering trees and listening to the whisper of wind through their branches, she could almost believe those stories were true. As night fell, she made camp in a small clearing beside a stream. The sound of running water was soothing, and the open space gave her a clear view in all directions. She built a small fire and sat beside it, her father's sword across her knees as she kept watch. Tomorrow she would reach Thornwood Valley. Tomorrow she would face the man she had wronged in her heart, if not in deed. And perhaps tomorrow she would begin the real hunt for justice. The carved bone horn that hung from the oak tree's lowest branch was polished smooth by countless hands, its surface etched with the runes of safe passage and parley. Kara had seen such tokens before. They marked the boundaries of a chieftain's territory and served as a way for travelers to announce their peaceful intentions. To ignore the horn and enter uninvited would be seen as an act of aggression. She dismounted and approached the ancient oak, her boots crunching softly on the carpet of fallen leaves. The Thornwood Valley spread out below her, a natural amphitheater carved between steep hills and filled with the golden light of late afternoon. She could see the smoke of cooking fires rising from a camp near the valley's center, and the tiny figures of men and horses moving about their daily tasks. Somewhere down there was Thane of Skeld, the man she had traveled so far to find, the man she had intended to kill. The thought still seemed impossible to reconcile with everything she had learned about him. How could the same person be both the honorable warrior described by Magnus and Gunnar, and the savage murderer she had imagined for so long? She lifted the horn to her lips and blew 3 long, clear notes, the traditional call for parley. The sound echoed across the valley, and she saw distant figures pause in their activities to look up toward her position. Within moments, riders were mounting their horses and heading in her direction. Kara waited beside the oak tree, her hands empty and visible, her weapons secured but accessible. The approaching riders numbered 6, all of them bearing the red and gold banners of Skeld clan. They rode in loose formation, alert but not aggressive, professional warriors who knew their business. The man in the lead was not what she had expected. Thane of Skeld was tall, certainly, but not the giant of her imagination. He had perhaps 40 winters on him, with dark hair shot through with silver and intelligent blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. There was a presence about him, a quiet authority that spoke of years spent making life and death decisions. He wore good mail but nothing ostentatious. and the sword at his side was well used. Rather than decorative, he brought his horse to a halt 10 paces away and studied her with the careful attention of a man who had survived. Too many betrayals to take anything at face value. I am Thane of Skeld, he said, his voice deep and measured. You called for parley. State your name and your business. Kara lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. I am Kara Stormblade, daughter of Bjorn the Bold. I have traveled far to speak with you. Something flickered in Thane's eyes at the mention of her father's name. Recognition. And perhaps something deeper. Sorrow, maybe, or regret. Bjorn's daughter, he said quietly. You have his look about you. You knew him. I did. Thane dismounted his horse and approached slowly, his movements careful and non-threatening. He was a good man and a fine warrior. His death was a great loss. The simple honesty in his voice caught Kara off guard. She had expected denials, excuses, perhaps even boasts. Instead, she heard genuine grief for a fallen comrade. I know how he died, she said, watching Thane's face carefully. I know who really killed him. Thane stopped walking, his expression growing grave. Do you? And what do you know of me? Kara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I know that I came here prepared to challenge you to single combat for my father's murder. I know that I have spent 3 months sharpening my blade and hardening my heart for vengeance. And I know that I was wrong. The admission was harder than she had expected it to be. For so long, hatred of Thane had given her purpose, direction, a reason to keep moving forward when grief threatened to drown her. To release that hatred felt like losing a part of herself. Magnus One Eye told you the truth, Thane said. It wasn't a question. He did. He told me how you and my father fought together that night, how you honored him after he fell. He told me about Hrothgar. At the mention of that name, Thane's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. His warriors, who had been maintaining a respectful distance, shifted restlessly in their saddles. Hrothgar the Oathbreaker, Thane said, and there was bitter history in the way he spoke the name. So that's why you've come. You want my help hunting him? Yes, Kara said simply. I've been told you're the only man who's faced him and lived to tell of it. Thane was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with old pain. 3 times I've fought him. 3 times I've driven him back into the eastern wastes. And 3 times he's returned stronger and more savage than before. He's not a man you hunt, Kara Stormblade. He's a force of nature, like a wildfire or a plague. You can only hope to contain him, never to defeat him completely. But he can be hurt, Kara pressed. He can bleed. And if he can bleed, he can die. Yes, Thane admitted. He can die. But the cost? He shook his head. I've lost too many good men learning that lesson. I won't lead another young warrior to their death chasing an impossible dream of vengeance. The words stung, but Kara forced herself to remain calm. This isn't about vengeance anymore. It's about justice. How many more villages will burn while Hrothgar runs free? How many more fathers will die while we debate the cost of action? Thane studied her face for a long moment, and she could see him weighing her words, her determination, her chances of survival. You're very young to speak of justice with such certainty. My father didn't raise me to be young, Kara replied. He raised me to be ready. One of Thane's warriors, a grizzled man with scars on his arms and grey in his beard, leaned forward in his saddle. My lord, the sun grows late. Should we not continue this discussion in camp, where proper hospitality can be offered? Thane nodded. Wise counsel, Ulrich. He turned back to Kara. Will you accept guest right in my hall? There is much to discuss, and these are matters that should not be aired under the open sky. Kara hesitated for just a moment. To accept hospitality from Thane would place her under his protection, but it would also create obligations and expectations. Once she broke bread with him, the traditional bonds of host and guest would make it impossible for her to challenge him to combat. Not that she intended to anymore. I accept, she said formally, and I thank you for the honor. The ride down into the valley gave her a chance to observe Thane's camp and his men. What she saw impressed her despite herself. The camp was well organized and defensible, with clear sightlines and multiple escape routes. The warriors she passed nodded respectfully to their leader but showed none of the servile fear she might have expected from the followers of a tyrant. These were free men who chose to follow Thane, not slaves compelled by fear. The hall itself was a temporary structure, a large tent reinforced with wooden poles and hung with fine tapestries. But it was clean and well appointed, with room for perhaps 30 people to sit comfortably around the central fire pit. Weapons hung from the support poles, and she recognized the craftsmanship of several renowned smiths. As they dismounted, Thane turned to her with something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "Welcome to my hall, Kara Stormblade. Tonight we feast and tomorrow we plan. But I warn you now, if you truly mean to hunt Hrothgar, you'll need more than courage and a sharp blade. You'll need allies and luck and perhaps the blessing of the gods themselves." The golden torque around Thane's neck caught the firelight as he leaned forward, his expression grave in the flickering shadows of the hall. The feast had been simple but satisfying. Roasted venison, fresh bread, and ale that tasted of honey and distant summers. Now, with the meal finished and the warriors settling into comfortable conversation around the edges of the hall, Thane had drawn Kara aside to a quiet corner where they could speak freely. "Before I tell you what I know of Hrothgar," he said quietly, "you must understand what you're truly asking. This is not a quest for glory or simple justice. This is a journey into darkness that may well consume you." Kara met his gaze steadily. "I've already been consumed by darkness. For 3 months I've lived with nothing but hatred and the promise of revenge. At least now I have a chance to turn that pain into something meaningful." Thane nodded slowly, recognizing something in her words that resonated with his own experience. "Then listen well, and remember everything I tell you." He took a sip of his ale, gathering his thoughts. "Hrothgar was not always a monster. 5 years ago he was much like me, a clan chieftain, trying to protect his people in dangerous times. We even fought as allies once, against raiders from the southern kingdoms. What changed him?" Kara asked. "The same thing that nearly destroyed me," Thane replied, his voice heavy with old grief. "He lost everything that mattered to him. His wife, his children, his entire clan, all killed in a single night by enemies who struck without warning or mercy. But where I channeled my pain into protecting others, Hrothgar let it twist him into something inhuman." The golden torque seemed to pulse with its own inner light as Thane's fingers absently traced its surface. Kara noticed the gesture and realized it was unconscious, a habit born of long association with the ornament. "That's beautiful work," she observed. Nodding toward the torque, Thane's hand stilled, and for a moment his expression softened. "It was my wife's. She wore it on our wedding day, and I placed it around her neck when we pledged our lives to each other. When she died, I took it as a reminder of love, of loss, and of the duty I owe to her memory." The simple honesty of his words hit Kara like a physical blow. She had expected to find a brutal warrior, a man hardened by violence and ambition. Instead, she found someone who carried his grief the way she carried hers, like a sacred burden that defined his every action. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't know." "Few do," Thane replied. "I don't speak of it often, but you should understand. When we hunt Hrothgar, we're not just pursuing a madman. We're facing a reflection of what we might become if we let our pain consume us entirely." He stood and walked to one of the weapon racks, drawing forth a long dagger with an elaborate silver hilt. The blade was etched with runes, and even in the firelight, Kara could see it was a masterwork of the smith's art. "This was taken from one of Hrothgar's raiders after our last encounter," Thane said, offering the weapon for her inspection. "Look at the craftsmanship, the quality of the steel. These aren't the crude weapons of common bandits. Hrothgar has attracted skilled followers, warriors who believe in his cause or who simply enjoy the freedom to kill without restraint." Kara examined the dagger carefully. The runes were unfamiliar to her, twisted versions of the traditional scripts that seemed to writhe in the dancing light. "What do they say?" "Death comes to all," Thane translated. It's become something of a motto among his followers. They believe they're agents of fate, bringing inevitable doom to those who cling to the old ways of honor and law. The implications chilled her. "How many men does he command?" "That's difficult to say," Thane admitted, returning to his seat. "His core followers number perhaps 50 or 60, hardened killers who've been with him for years. But he also attracts temporary allies, desperate men, outcasts, anyone with a grudge against civilized society. At any given time, he might field anywhere from 100 to 300 warriors." Kara felt her confidence waver. "And you think the two of us can stand against such numbers?" "Not alone," Thane said. "But Hrothgar's strength is also his weakness. He rules through fear and violence, which means his followers are always looking over their shoulders, wondering when they might become his next victim. His alliances are temporary and built on mutual benefit rather than loyalty. Strike at the right moment in the right way, and his army will crumble like a structure built on rotten timber." "You have a plan," Kara realized. Thane's smile was grim. "The beginning of one, but it will require patience, careful preparation, and considerable risk. Are you prepared for that?" Before Kara could answer, a commotion arose from the other side of the hall. One of the guards had entered, his face flushed from hard riding and his expression urgent. He approached Thane's table and bowed quickly. "My lord," he said, breathing heavily. "A messenger has arrived from the eastern settlements. He bears grave news." Thane gestured for the man to be brought forward. The messenger was young, perhaps 20 winters, with the lean build of one who spent his life in the saddle. His clothes were travel-stained, and his horse was foam-flecked from hard riding. "Speak," Thane commanded. "My lord," the messenger began, his voice tight with exhaustion and fear. 3 days past, Hrothgar struck again. The village of Oakenford has been burned to the ground. Near 200 souls lived there, men, women, children. None were spared. Kara felt sick. Oakenford had been a peaceful farming community, far from any strategic importance. The only reason to attack it would be pure malice. "Were there any survivors?" Thane asked, his voice carefully controlled. "A handful, my lord. Enough to tell the tale. They say Hrothgar has changed, become even more savage than before. He's taken to wearing a helm made from a dragon's skull, and his eyes burn with an unnatural light. Some whisper he's made pacts with dark spirits to gain power beyond mortal men." Thane and Kara exchanged glances. If even half of what the messenger said was true, Hrothgar was becoming something far worse than a simple madman. "Where does he go now?" Thane asked. "North, my lord, toward the Ironhold Mountains. The survivors said his band has grown, near 300 strong, with more joining him each day. They speak of him as if he were a god of war come to cleanse the land of weakness." Thane stood, his expression grim with purpose. "Rest yourself and your horse. You've done well to bring this news so quickly." He turned to Kara, and she could see the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. "It seems we have less time than I hoped. Hrothgar grows bolder and stronger with each passing day. If we're going to stop him, it must be soon." "Then we leave tomorrow," Kara said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. Thane studied her face in the firelight, seeing the determination there. "Tomorrow we begin preparations. But first, you need to understand exactly what you're volunteering for. This won't be a glorious battle between honorable warriors. It will be brutal, ugly work, the kind that leaves scars on the soul as well as the body." Kara thought of Oakenford, of 200 innocent people cut down for no reason other than one man's twisted hunger for destruction. "My father taught me that some things are worth any price," she said. "This is one of them." The map spread across the rough wooden table was a masterwork of the cartographer's art, its edges worn smooth by countless hands, and its surface marked with the accumulated knowledge of decades. Ink lines showed rivers and mountain ranges, while tiny symbols indicated villages, fortresses, and known dangers. But it was the red marks scattered across the eastern territories that drew Kara's attention, each one representing one of Hrothgar's attacks. "See the pattern?" Thane asked, tracing his finger along the crimson dots. "He's not striking randomly. Each target serves a purpose, either to gather supplies, eliminate potential threats, or send a message to those who might oppose him." Kara studied the map more carefully, trying to see what Thane saw. It looks like he's working his way towards something. But what? The Ironhold Mountains, said Ulrich, Thane's grizzled second-in-command. He pointed to the jagged peaks drawn at the map's eastern edge, specifically the ancient fortress of Grimspire. Legend says it was built by giant kings in the time before men, carved directly into the mountain's heart. If Hrothgar could claim it as his stronghold, he'd be untouchable, Thane finished grimly. The approaches are narrow and easily defended, and the fortress itself is said to be impregnable. From there, he could raid the lowlands at will, while remaining safe from any pursuit. The painted wooden raven that served as their marker for Hrothgar's current position sat ominously close to the mountain range. They had been tracking his movements for 5 days now, gathering reports from refugees and survivors, trying to predict his next move. How long before he reaches Grimspire? Kara asked. If he continues at his current pace, perhaps 10 days, Thane replied. But he'll need to secure his supply lines first. The mountains are barren. No forage for horses, no game to hunt, no villages to plunder. He'll have to bring everything he needs with him. Kara felt a spark of hope. Then that's our chance. Hit him while he's preparing before he can retreat to his fortress. Thane shook his head. It's not that simple. He's no fool. He'll have scouts watching every approach, and his camp will be heavily fortified. A direct assault would be suicide. Then what do you propose? Kara asked, frustration creeping into her voice. They had been planning for days, and every strategy they discussed seemed to lead to the same conclusion. Impossible odds and certain death. Before Thane could answer, another of his warriors approached the table. This was Sigurd the Swift, a lean man with intelligent eyes who served as the warband's scout and spy. His expression was troubled as he bowed to his chieftain. "My lord," he said quietly, "I bring word from the south. King Harald grows suspicious of your activities. His representatives have been asking questions in the villages. Why the great Thane of Skeld travels with such urgency, what enemies he seeks to face." Thane's jaw tightened. "And what answers do the villagers give?" "Truthful ones, mostly," Sigurd replied. "That you hunt Hrothgar the Oathbreaker. But the king's men seem to think this is some elaborate deception, that you're actually gathering strength for a rebellion." The implications hit Kara like a cold wind. "He thinks you're planning to challenge his authority." "Harold has grown paranoid in his old age," Ulrich explained. "He sees enemies everywhere, and a powerful chieftain operating independently in the borderlands makes him nervous. If he decides we're a threat, he'll declare us outlaws and send his armies to hunt us down," Thane finished, "which would leave Hrothgar free to complete his conquest of the eastern territories." Kara stared at the map, her mind racing. Every path forward seemed blocked by impossible obstacles. "There has to be another way, something we're not seeing." "Perhaps there is," said a new voice from the entrance to the tent. They turned to see a figure wrapped in a dark cloak, her face hidden by a deep hood. But when she pushed the hood back, Kara gasped in recognition. It was Astrid the Wise, the Velva from her own village of Raven's Hollow. "Seer," Thane said, rising to bow respectfully. "You honor us with your presence. But how did you find us here?" Astrid's ancient eyes glittered with hidden knowledge. "I have walked the paths between worlds for longer than you have lived. Thane of Skeld. Distance is no barrier to one who knows the old ways." She approached the table, her gnarled fingers tracing the painted raven that marked Hrothgar's position. "I have seen the darkness that follows this one. It grows stronger each day, fed by blood and hatred." "Then you know why we're here," Kara said. "Can you help us?" The Velva was quiet for a long moment, her unseeing gaze fixed on something beyond the physical world. "I bring both aid and warning," she said finally. "The spirits have shown me glimpses of what is to come. Hrothgar seeks more than just a fortress in the mountains. He searches for something ancient, something that was hidden there in the time before memory." "What kind of something?" Thane asked, his voice sharp with concern. "A weapon," Astrid replied. "Forged by the first shamans, bound with the power of winter itself. In the old tongue it was called Rhymebane, the Frostbringer. Legend says it could freeze the blood in a man's veins, or turn an entire army to ice with a single word of command." The temperature in the tent seemed to drop as she spoke. Even the seasoned warriors around the table looked uncomfortable at the mention of such power. "Surely that's just legend," Ulrich said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Astrid asked. "Have you not heard the reports from Hrothgar's recent attacks? Witnesses speak of unnatural cold, of frost appearing in the height of summer. His very presence seems to draw the warmth from the world around him." Kara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "You're saying he's already found this weapon?" "Not found," Astrid corrected. "But he draws closer to it with each passing day. The fortress of Grimspire was built to guard the weapon, not to serve as a mere stronghold. If Hrothgar claims both the fortress and what lies within it, he'll be unstoppable," Thane finished. "A madman with the power of ancient magic at his command," the Velva nodded gravely. "Which is why you must reach him first. Not to defeat him in battle, that would be impossible even with conventional weapons, but to claim Rheinbane before he does." "And then what?" Kara asked. "Use it against him?" Astrid's expression darkened. "No, such weapons corrupt all who wield them. That is why they were hidden away in the first place. You must destroy it, break the ancient bonds that give it power. Only then will Hrothgar become vulnerable to mortal steel." Thane studied the map again, his expression grim with new understanding. "You're asking us to race an army to the most dangerous place in the Eastern Territories, infiltrate an impregnable fortress, and destroy a weapon of immense power, all while avoiding both Hrothgar's forces and the king's suspicions." "I ask nothing," Astrid replied. "I merely show you what must be done if you would save this land from eternal winter." The painted raven seemed to stare back at them from the map, a herald of doom perched on the edge of catastrophe. Kara looked around the table at the faces of the warriors, good men who had already risked much by following Thane's quest. To ask them to face such impossible odds seemed like madness, but then she thought of her father, of the honor he had died defending. She thought of Oakenford and its 200 innocent victims. She thought of all the villages that would burn if Hrothgar gained the power he sought. "When do we leave?" she asked. Thane's smile was grim but genuine. "At first light. We'll travel light and fast, ahead of Hrothgar's main force. If we're lucky, we can reach Grimspire while he's still gathering supplies. And if we're unlucky," Ulrich asked. "Then we'll die with honor," Thane replied. "But at least we'll die trying to save something greater than ourselves." The black obsidian mirror lay shattered on the floor of what had once been Grimspire's great hall, its fragments reflecting the torchlight like scattered stars against the ancient stone. Each shard seemed to hold its own dark secret, whispering of visions that had driven men to madness and truths too terrible to bear. Kara knelt beside the broken remnants, her heart pounding as she began to understand what they had discovered. They had reached the fortress 3 days ahead of Hrothgar's army, climbing the treacherous mountain paths in a desperate race against time. What they found waiting for them defied all their expectations. Grimspire was not empty as they had hoped, nor was it defended by Hrothgar's advanced scouts as they had feared. Instead, they discovered something far more disturbing. The fortress was inhabited by its original builders, not men, but the remnants of the giant kings who had carved these halls from living stone in ages past. They were ancient beyond measure, their massive forms withered by time, but their minds still sharp with accumulated wisdom. And they had been waiting. "You came seeking the Frostbringer," the largest of them had said, his voice like grinding stone. "But you understand nothing of what you seek to destroy." That conversation had led them here, to this chamber deep in the mountain's heart, where the truth lay, scattered across the floor like broken dreams. Thane stood beside her, his face pale in the flickering light. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "The mirror showed us the past, but what we saw contradicts everything we believed about Hrothgar." Kara picked up one of the larger shards, gasping as visions flooded her mind unbidden. She saw Hrothgar as he had been 5 years ago, not the monster of legend, but a grieving father cradling his dead daughter in his arms. She saw him making desperate bargains with powers beyond mortal understanding. trading his humanity piece by piece for the strength to avenge his family's murder. But most shocking of all, she saw who had truly been responsible for that massacre. "The king," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "King Harold ordered the attack on Hrothgar's village." The obsidian fragment slipped from her numb fingers, shattering further as it hit the stone floor. The truth it had revealed was too monstrous to fully comprehend. Harold had orchestrated the slaughter of innocents to remove a potential rival, then allowed Hrothgar to be blamed for the retaliations that followed. Thane's face had gone ashen. "That's impossible. Harold may be paranoid, but he's not evil." Kara interrupted, rising to her feet. "Look at the evidence, Thane. How many rivals has he eliminated over the years? How many accidents have befallen chieftains who grew too powerful or too popular?" The giant king who had led them to this chamber stepped forward, his ancient eyes sad with the weight of centuries. "Your mortal kings have always been thus," he rumbled. "They fear strength in others because they know their own foundations are built on sand." Harold saw Hrothgar's growing influence among the eastern clans and decided to eliminate him before he could become a threat. But why frame him for raids he didn't commit? Thane asked, still struggling to accept what they had learned. "Because a dead hero becomes a martyr," the giant replied. "Better to destroy a man's reputation first, turn him into a monster in the eyes of his people. Then when he finally falls, none will mourn his passing." Kara felt sick as the implications cascaded through her mind. "And we've been doing Harold's work for him. Every village that blamed Hrothgar for their suffering, every warrior who took up arms against him, we've all been dancing to the king's tune." "Not entirely," said another voice from the shadows. They turned to see Astrid emerging from a side passage, her expression grave. "Hrothgar's pain is real, as is the darkness that has claimed him. Whatever injustices drove him to this path, he has still chosen to become a monster." The vulva approached the broken mirror, carefully avoiding the scattered shards. "The powers he has bargained with do not care about justice or revenge. They hunger only for destruction, and they have used his grief as a gateway into this world. He may have been a victim once, but he is a willing servant of darkness now." Thane ran his hands through his hair, overwhelmed by the complexity of what they faced. "So what do we do? Hrothgar is still a threat, regardless of what drove him to it. The weapon still needs to be destroyed. And now we learn that our own king is the real architect of this disaster. We do what we came here to do," Kara said firmly. "We destroy Rheinbane before Hrothgar can claim it. But afterward..." She looked at the broken mirror, seeing her own reflection fractured into 1,000 pieces. "Afterward, we make sure the truth comes to light." The giant king nodded approvingly. "Wisdom at last. But know this, destroying the Frostbringer will not be simple. The weapon has been bound to this place for 1,000 years, its power woven into the very stones of the mountain. To break those bonds will require a sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Thane asked warily. The ancient being's expression was sorrowful. "One who shares the weapon's nature must willingly take its burden upon themselves, then allow their life force to be consumed in the breaking. Only in death can the bonds be severed." A chill settled over the chamber that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Kara understood what the giant king was telling them. One of them would have to die to complete their mission. "There must be another way," Thane said desperately. "If there is, we have not discovered it in 1,000 years of study," the giant replied. "The weapon was created with the darkest of magics, bound with sacrificial blood and forged in the fires of malice. Only an equal sacrifice can unmake what was made." Astrid spoke into the heavy silence that followed. "There may be another option. The weapon draws its power from winter's heart. Cold, death, the ending of things. But there are other forces in the world. The fire of life, the warmth of love, the light of hope. Perhaps those powers could serve where sacrifice cannot." The giant king's massive head tilted thoughtfully. "You speak of the old songs, Velva. The tales of weapons unmade by their opposites rather than by force. It is possible. But such magic has not been attempted since the world was young. Then we'd better learn quickly," Kara said. How long before Hrothgar's army reaches the fortress? 2 days, perhaps less, Thane replied. His scouts are already probing the lower passes. As if summoned by their words, the sound of horns echoed through the mountain corridors, their own sentries signaling the approach of enemies. But the calls were wrong somehow, too urgent and too frightened for a simple scouting report. Sigurd the Swift burst into the chamber, his face flushed with exertion and alarm. "My lord," he gasped, "they're here! Hrothgar's advance guard has reached the fortress walls." "Impossible," Thane said. "They shouldn't be here for another 2 days. Tell that to the 50 warriors climbing the eastern approach," Sigurd replied grimly. "And there's more. They're not attacking. They're just waiting. As if they know something we don't." The giant king's expression darkened. "He has learned of your presence here. The weapon calls to those who would claim it, and he has felt its song growing stronger." Kara felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Everything had changed in the space of an hour. Their mission, their understanding of the enemy, their knowledge of who could truly be trusted in this war. But one thing remained constant. The weapon had to be destroyed, no matter the cost. "Show us to Shieldmaiden," she said to the giant king. "Whatever ritual needs to be performed, whatever sacrifice is required, let's finish this before Hrothgar finds another way inside." The ancient being nodded slowly. "Follow me, young warriors. But know that once you have seen the Frostbringer in all its terrible beauty, there will be no turning back. The weapon will mark you as enemies of the Winter Court, and its servants will hunt you to the ends of the earth." As they followed the giant through increasingly narrow passages that led deeper into the mountain's heart, Kara couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking towards something that would change them all forever. The broken mirror had shown them truths they weren't prepared to face. Now they would have to face an even greater truth, that sometimes the only way to defeat darkness was to carry some of it within yourself. The crystalline chamber that held Shieldmaiden was a cathedral of ice and shadow, its walls carved from the mountain's living heart and decorated with frost patterns that seemed to move in the dancing torchlight. At the chamber's center, suspended in a shaft of pale blue light that descended from somewhere far above, hung the weapon that had haunted their quest from the beginning. Shieldmaiden was not the crude blade Kara had imagined. Instead, it was a spear of impossible beauty, its shaft carved from what appeared to be a single piece of ice that never melted, its head forged from metal that gleamed like captured starlight. Ancient runes spiraled along its length, pulsing with an inner radiance that spoke of power beyond mortal understanding. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The voice came from behind them, cultured and calm, carrying no trace of the madness they had expected to find. Kara spun around, her hand flying to her sword, to see Hrothgar standing in the chamber's entrance. He was not the giant of legend, tall certainly, but no taller than Thane. His armor was fine steel rather than crude iron, and his face, while marked by years of pain and hard living, retained the intelligent features of a nobleman. Only his eyes betrayed the darkness within, pale blue orbs that seemed to hold the cold emptiness of winter nights. "Hrothgar," Thane said, his voice steady despite the obvious shock of the encounter, "you're earlier than expected." "Time moves differently in these mountains," Hrothgar replied, stepping into the chamber with the casual confidence of one who feared no ambush. "The weapon calls to those who would claim it, and I have been listening to its song for years." His gaze shifted to Kara, and she felt ice forming in her veins. "You must be Bjorn's daughter. He spoke of you often in those final moments." The casual mention of her father's death sent rage flooding through Kara's system. "You killed him!" "Did I?" Hrothgar asked, tilting his head slightly. "Or did Harald's soldiers kill him while I was fighting to protect the very people your king had marked for death?" He gestured toward the weapon floating before them. "The mirror has shown you the truth by now. You know who the real monster is." Thane stepped forward, his hand on his sword hilt. "Whatever injustices you've suffered, they don't justify what you've become." Hrothgar's laugh was like wind through a graveyard. "Justify? I need no justification. I'm what this world has made me, a creature of necessity, freed from the comfortable lies that let good men sleep at night. while evil flourishes in the halls of power. The giant king who had guided them to this place spoke for the first time since Hrothgar's arrival. "You know why we are here, Icebearer. You know what must be done." "Indeed I do," Hrothgar agreed. "The weapon must be claimed by one strong enough to wield it properly. For too long it has slept in this mountain while the world burned around it. But no more." He began walking toward Rheinbane, each step measured and deliberate. "With its power I can remake this kingdom into something honest. No more kings hiding their cruelty behind noble words. No more innocents dying while their betters play games of thrones." "You'll freeze the world," Astrid said, emerging from the shadows where she had been chanting quietly in the old tongue. "The weapon's power is not creation, but destruction. It knows only how to end things, not how to build them. Sometimes destruction is necessary," Hrothgar replied. "Sometimes you have to burn down the old forest so new growth can take root." Kara found her voice, despite the cold fear that gripped her heart. "And how many innocents will die in your new world? How many children will pay the price for your vision of justice?" For the first time, something flickered across Hrothgar's features, a shadow of the man he had once been. "Children die anyway," he said quietly. "At least this way, their deaths will serve a purpose." The temperature in the chamber continued to drop as Hrothgar approached the floating spear. Ice began forming on the walls, and their breath became visible in the suddenly frigid air. The weapon itself pulsed brighter, as if sensing the approach of one who could properly channel its power. "Stop him!" the giant king urged. "Once he touches Rheinbane, the binding will recognize him as its master. After that, nothing in this world will be able to stand against the winter's fury." Thane drew his sword, the steel ringing as it cleared the scabbard. "I can't let you do this, Hrothgar." "Too many have died already." Hrothgar paused, turning to face his old ally with something that might have been regret. "You were always too noble for your own good. You Thane. That's why your family died, because you were busy protecting strangers instead of guarding your own hearth." The words hit Thane like physical blows, but he didn't falter. "Maybe, but at least I didn't let grief turn me into the very evil I once fought against." "Evil?" Hrothgar's voice carried a note of genuine puzzlement. "I'm not evil, old friend. I'm necessary. The kingdom is rotting from within, and sometimes a surgeon must cut away diseased flesh to save the patient." Kara stepped forward, her father's sword gleaming in the weapon's ethereal light. "My father believed in justice, not vengeance. He would have found another way." "Your father was a fool," Hrothgar said flatly. "A noble fool, but a fool nonetheless. He died because he trusted in honor and law, concepts that mean nothing to men like Harold." He resumed his approach to Rheinbane, now only a few steps away from the floating spear. "I will not make the same mistake." The air in the chamber had become so cold that ice crystals began forming on their weapons and armor. Astrid continued her chanting, the ancient words growing more urgent as Hrothgar drew closer to his goal. The giant king watched with the patience of stone, but Kara could see the worry in his ancient eyes. "There's another way," she called out desperately. The Völva spoke of it, using opposite forces to unmake what was made with darkness. Hrothgar's hand was inches from Rheinbane now, the weapon's glow intensifying as it sensed its potential master. "Pretty words," he said, "but words won't bring back the dead or punish the guilty. Only power can do that." Thane lunged forward, his sword aimed at Hrothgar's back, but the ice-touched warrior moved with inhuman speed. He spun around, catching Thane's blade on a gauntlet that gleamed with the same cold light as the weapon itself. Where the steel touched his armor, frost spread like a living thing. "You cannot stop me," Hrothgar said, his voice now carrying the hollow echo of winter winds. "I have already begun the transformation." The weapon recognizes its true master. As if to prove his words, Rheinbane began to move, drifting slowly through the air toward his outstretched hand. The light that held it in place flickered and dimmed, the ancient bindings starting to unravel after 1,000 years of patient waiting. Kara felt desperation clawing at her chest. They had come so far, learned so much, only to fail at the crucial moment. The weapon would fall into Hrothgar's hands. and with it would come an eternal winter that would consume everything she had ever loved. But then she remembered Astrid's words about opposite forces, about the warmth of life conquering the cold of death. An idea began to form, desperate, probably suicidal, but perhaps their only chance. "Thane," she called out, never taking her eyes off Hrothgar. "The golden torque you wear, your wife's wedding gift. You said it represents love and life." Understanding dawned in Thane's eyes. The torque around his neck began to glow with a warm, golden light that pushed back against Rhymbane's cold radiance. The competing energies made the air shimmer like heat waves rising from summer stone. Hrothgar snarled, reaching desperately for the weapon as it wavered between the two forces. "You understand nothing. Love is weakness. Hope is a lie. Only winter's truth endures." "Maybe," Kara said, drawing her father's sword and feeling it grow warm in her hands as memories of his love flooded through her. "But even winter ends. Even the longest night gives way to dawn." Astrid's chanting reached a crescendo, her voice joining with the harmonics created by the competing magical energies. The chamber filled with light, cold blue from Rhymbain, warm gold from the torque and sword, silver white from the Volva's incantations. "Now," the giant king commanded. "While the forces are balanced, strike at the weapon itself. The binding can be broken if the balance tips toward life instead of death." But Hrothgar heard the words too, and with a roar of fury that shook the mountain itself, he made one final lunge for Rhymbain. His fingers closed around the spear's shaft, just as Kara and Thane charged forward, their weapons raised high. The moment of contact sent shockwaves through the chamber, cracks appearing in the ancient ice walls as forces older than human civilization clashed in the confined space. Everything hung in the balance, the fate of kingdoms, the lives of innocents, and the very nature of the world they sought to protect. In that crystalline instant, before the final confrontation began, Kara found herself thinking not of glory or victory, but of her father's words, "Let wisdom temper your rage." Perhaps in the end, that would be enough. The moment Hrothgar's fingers closed around Rhymbain's shaft, winter exploded through the chamber with the fury of 1,000 blizzards. Ice erupted from every surface, turning the crystalline walls into jagged spears of frozen death. The very air became a weapon, each breath searing their lungs with cold so intense. It felt like breathing liquid fire. Kara's charge became a desperate struggle simply to remain upright as the floor beneath her feet transformed into a skating rink of supernatural ice. Her father's sword blazed with warm light in her hands, the only thing preventing her from freezing solid as the temperature plummeted beyond what mortal flesh could endure. Hrothgar stood at the chamber's heart like a statue carved from winter itself. Rhymbain clasped in both hands as power flowed through him in visible waves. His armor had become something else entirely, not steel but living ice that pulsed with its own malevolent life. When he spoke, his voice carried the hollow echo of wind through empty places. "Do you see now?" he asked, and frost formed on his lips with every word. "This is what true power looks like. Not the petty machinations of mortal kings, but the fundamental force that shapes the world itself." Thane fought his way forward against the supernatural cold, his golden torque blazing like a small sun around his neck. But even its warmth seemed pitifully small against the winter fury that filled the chamber. Ice formed on his sword blade, weighing it down and making each swing clumsy and slow. "You're killing yourself," Thane shouted over the howling wind that now filled the enclosed space. "No mortal body can contain that much power." Hrothgar's laugh was the sound of glaciers carving into the sea. "Mortality is just another chain to be broken. I have moved beyond such petty limitations." He raised Rhymbain high, and the temperature dropped another impossible degree. "Watch as I demonstrate the future of this world." The spear's point began to glow with concentrated cold, energy building for some terrible release. Kara realized with growing horror that he intended to freeze the entire mountain, turning Grimspire and everyone within it into a monument to his transformation. "Astrid!" she called desperately. "Can you break his connection to the weapon?" The Völva stood near the chamber's edge, her ancient form surrounded by a nimbus of silver light that barely protected her from the supernatural assault. Her chanting had become a battle song now, each word a weapon wielded against the growing darkness. "The binding has accepted him," she replied, her voice strained with effort. "But it is not yet complete. The weapon still remembers its original purpose. It was created to end wars, not to start them. If we can remind it of that purpose." Before she could finish the thought, Hrothgar turned his attention to her with the focused malevolence of an Arctic storm. "Silence, old woman. Your words have no power here." He thrust Rheinbane in her direction, and a lance of pure cold shot across the chamber. Astrid's protective light flared and held for a moment, then began to crack like glass under impossible pressure. The Völva fell to her knees, ice forming on her robes as her defenses failed. Kara moved without thinking, throwing herself between Astrid and the deadly cold. Her father's sword met the lance of winter, and for a moment the two forces hung in perfect balance, the warmth of love and sacrifice against the cold of hatred and revenge. The clash sent shockwaves through the chamber, and Kara felt the impact all the way to her bones. But she held her ground, pouring every memory of her father's love into the blade, every lesson he had taught her about honor and justice. "You cannot win," Hrothgar said, pressing his attack. The cold intensified, and Kara felt her strength beginning to fail. Love is temporary, honor is an illusion, only winter is eternal. But then Thane was beside her, his own blade joining hers, the golden torque around his neck pulsing with renewed strength. "Maybe winter is eternal," he said through gritted teeth, "but so is the promise of spring." Together, their combined warmth began to push back against Hrothgar's assault. The giant king joined his voice to Astrid's chanting, and even the ancient stones of the chamber seemed to remember older, warmer days when the mountain was young and green. Hrothgar's expression shifted from confidence to uncertainty. "Impossible," he snarled. "I am the master of this weapon. I've paid the price in blood and pain." "No," Kara said, her voice growing stronger as understanding dawned. "You've only borrowed its power. But we're offering something it's forgotten, the warmth of willing sacrifice, freely given." The spear in Hrothgar's hands began to pulse erratically, its cold light flickering between blue and gold as competing influences fought for control. The weapon had been forged in darkness and hatred, but it remembered older purposes, better masters who had wielded it to protect rather than to destroy. "Choose," Kara called to the ancient artifact. "Remember what you were made to be." For a moment that stretched into eternity, the chamber hung in perfect balance. Then Rheinbane began to sing, not with the hollow wind sound of winter, but with something warmer, more human. The sound of hope enduring in dark places, of love persisting despite loss, of spring returning after the longest winter, and Hrothgar, master of ice and shadow, began to scream. Rheinbane's song filled the chamber with harmonics that seemed to reach into the very foundations of the mountain, awakening echoes that had slept for 1,000 years. The weapon pulsed in Hrothgar's grip, its icy surface beginning to crack as competing energies tore at the ancient bindings that held its power. "Let go," Kara urged, stepping closer despite the waves of cold that still emanated from the transformed warrior. "The weapon is destroying you from within. You can still choose to stop this." Hrothgar's scream had become something inhuman, a sound of pure agony as the spear's conflicting nature burned through his transformed flesh like acid. Ice and fire warred within him, and she could see hairline fractures spreading across his armor where the opposing forces met. "I cannot," he gasped, his voice barely recognizable. "Too much. Given up." Too much lost. His eyes, once coldly intelligent, now held the desperate madness of a man caught between life and death, with no way back to either. Thane moved to flank him, his sword still glowing with the warm light of the golden torque. "Then we'll help you choose," he said grimly. "One way or another, this ends now." The chamber shuddered as massive cracks appeared in the ice-covered walls. The competing magical energies were tearing the ancient fortress apart from within, and Kara could hear the distant rumble of stone falling in the corridors beyond. They had minutes at most before the entire structure collapsed around them. Astrid struggled to her feet, her face pale but determined. "The weapon fights itself now," she said, her voice hoarse from chanting. "Its original purpose wars with what Hrothgar has tried to make it become. We must tip the balance before it tears itself apart." "How?" Kara asked, dodging as a lance of unstable energy shot past her head and blasted a hole in the chamber wall. "The same way it was bound in the first place," the Volva replied, "with willing sacrifice. But not of life, of the thing you value most." Kara understood immediately. She looked at her father's sword, still glowing with warm light in her hands. It was the last physical connection she had to him, the final proof that he had loved and trusted her enough to pass on his most precious possession. Hrothgar raised Rheinbane again, this time pointing it at Thane. The spear's light had become chaotic, shifting between cold blue and warm gold with each pulse of the competing energies within it. "Stand back," he warned, though his voice cracked with strain. "I will not be denied my revenge." "Your revenge will destroy everything," Thane replied, not moving from his position, "including the memory of those you claim to honor. Better destruction than the lie of false peace," Hrothgar snarled. But even as he spoke, more cracks appeared in his icy armor, and Kara could see the man he had once been struggling beneath the monster he had become. She made her choice, stepping forward. She raised her father's sword high and brought it down not on Hrothgar, but on Rheinbane itself. The warm metal met the chaotic energies of the spear in the explosion of light that filled the chamber with the sound of breaking glass and ringing steel. The impact traveled up her arms like lightning, and she felt something fundamental break within the ancient weapon. The competing forces that had been tearing it apart suddenly found a new outlet, her father's blade, offered freely as a conduit for their resolution. Hrothgar's scream reached a crescendo as the spear in his hands began to disintegrate, its ice crystal form dissolving into mist and memory. The power that had transformed him had no anchor point now, no weapon to channel its fury, and it began to tear away from him in visible streams of silver-blue light. "No," he whispered, falling to his knees as the transformation reversed itself. "Without this, I am nothing, just another broken old man." Kara knelt beside him as his armor crumbled away, revealing the gaunt form beneath. He looked smaller now, mortal again, marked by years of pain, but no longer inhuman. "You're wrong," she said gently. "You're still the man who once fought beside my father to protect innocence. That part of you never truly died." Thane approached cautiously, his sword still drawn, but no longer threatening. "It's over, Hrothgar. The weapon is destroyed. Whatever darkness claimed you, it has no power now." The former ice-bearer looked up at them with eyes that were human once more, tired, haunted, but clear of the winter madness that had consumed him. "The things I've done," he whispered. "The people I've killed. How do I live with that?" "The same way the rest of us do," Astrid said, moving to join them as the chamber finally began to warm. "One day at a time, trying to be better than we were yesterday." The mountains shuddered again, and the giant king's voice echoed through the collapsing chamber. "The bindings are broken. The fortress will not survive the weapon's destruction. We must go now." As they helped Hrothgar to his feet and began their desperate flight through the crumbling corridors of Grimspire, Kara felt the weight of what they had accomplished. The weapon was gone, its power scattered to the winds. But more than that, a man's soul had been reclaimed from the darkness that had claimed it. Perhaps, she thought as they ran toward the light of day, that was the most important victory of all. The summer sun warmed Kara's face as she stood once again at her father's burial mound, but this time she was not alone. Thane knelt beside the ancient stones, placing a simple wreath of mountain flowers at the cairn's base, a gesture of respect from one warrior to another. The golden torque around his neck caught the light, no longer pulsing with magical energy, but still beautiful in its simplicity. "He would have been proud of what you accomplished," Thane said, rising to his feet. Not just destroying the weapon, but finding the strength to offer mercy when justice might have demanded otherwise. Kara nodded, her eyes on the distant fjord, where fishing boats dotted the calm water like scattered leaves. 6 months had passed since the collapse of Grimspire, 6 months of rebuilding and healing and learning to live with the choices they had made. The kingdom had changed, though not in ways that would be immediately obvious to those who hadn't walked the path they had traveled. "How is he?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from Thane's expression. "Better. The work helps him, I think. Having something constructive to do with his hands instead of dwelling on the past. The settlement is thriving under his guidance." Thane paused, choosing his words carefully. "He asks about you sometimes. Wonders if you've found peace." Kara smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Tell him I'm learning what peace looks like. It's different than I expected. The settlement Thane spoke of was a new thing in the Eastern Territories, a place where refugees from Hrothgar's former raids could rebuild their lives, led by the man who had once been their greatest enemy. It was a radical idea, one that King Harold had initially opposed until the truth about his role in the original massacres came to light. That revelation had cost him his throne, though he lived still in comfortable exile rather than facing the executioner's axe. The new king, Harold's younger brother Magnus the Just, had proven more interested in healing than in perpetuating old cycles of revenge. It helped that he had Astrid as an advisor. The Völva had accepted a position at court, bringing her ancient wisdom to bear on the challenges of rebuilding a fractured kingdom. "There's something else," Thane said, his tone suggesting news he wasn't sure how to share. "A messenger arrived this morning from the capital. The king wants to honor you, officially recognize your service to the realm." Kara shook her head immediately. "I don't want honors or titles. What we did was necessary, not heroic." "Perhaps," Thane agreed. "But symbols matter to people. They need to believe that justice is possible, that good can triumph over evil. Your story gives them that hope." She could understand the logic, even if she didn't entirely agree with it. The truth was more complicated than any heroic ballad could capture. A tangle of personal grief, political machinations, and ancient magic that had nearly consumed them all. But people needed their stories to make sense, needed heroes and villains clearly defined. "What about you?" she asked, changing the subject. "Will you accept the king's offer to join his council?" Thane was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "I'm not sure I'm suited for court life. Too many years on the frontier, too many battles fought in places where politics don't matter. But Magnus is a good man, and he'll need honest counsel if he's going to rebuild what his brother broke." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the play of light on the water below. The village of Ravenshollow looked much the same as it always had, but Kara could see the subtle changes that spoke of growing prosperity and confidence. New houses under construction, expanded fishing fleets, young faces that held hope instead of fear. "I've been thinking," she said eventually, "about what my father taught me, about the difference between justice and vengeance. I think I understand now what he meant, which is, vengeance looks backward, trying to balance the scales for past wrongs. Justice looks forward, trying to prevent future ones. What we did at Grimspire, that was justice, not just destroying the weapon, but giving Hrothgar a chance to become something better than what his pain had made him." Thane nodded thoughtfully. "Your father chose his words well when he spoke of wisdom tempering rage. It's a lesson more of us should learn." A movement on the hillside below caught their attention, Eric Ironhand climbing the path toward them, his massive form moving with the deliberate pace of a man who had important news to share. When he reached them, his scarred face was serious but not grim. "A ship has arrived," he announced without preamble, flying the colors of the eastern settlements. "They're asking for Kara Stormblade specifically." Kara felt a familiar stirring in her chest, not the cold fire of vengeance this time, but something warmer. Purpose, perhaps, or simply the recognition that her work in the world was far from finished. "What do they want?" she asked. Eric's expression softened into something that might have been pride. "They want to hire you as a mediator. There's been a dispute between two clans over grazing rights, and it's threatening to turn violent. They've heard that Bjorn the Bold's daughter has a gift for finding solutions that serve justice rather than feeding old grudges. Thane chuckled. It seems your reputation precedes you. Kara looked one last time at her father's burial mound, at the stones that marked his final resting place in this world. But she no longer felt the weight of grief pressing down on her like a stone. Instead, she felt the lightness of understanding, of finally knowing who she was meant to be. "Tell them I'll come," she said to Eric, "but I work alone." "Actually," Thane interjected with a slight smile, "I was thinking of taking some time away from court politics. Perhaps I could accompany you as a friend and ally, nothing more." Kara considered the offer, then nodded. "Welcome to the company, Thane of Skeld. Though I should warn you, this work doesn't come with much glory or gold." "I've had enough of both to last a lifetime," he replied. "Perhaps it's time to try something different." As they walked down the hillside together, toward whatever new challenges awaited, Kara felt her father's presence like a warm wind at her back, not gone, but transformed, living on in the choices she made and the path she chose to walk. The daughter of Bjorn the Bold had found her calling at last.